Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you this morning, and thank you very much for inviting me, in fact, although I suspect you were invited too. So we've all been invited. Let's get over that hurdle straight away. I used to work at the NEHT, where I had the pleasure of working alongside Nick on the Primary Futures program, where we, I think, broke some new ground on introducing careers advice into primary stage as well. And I want to talk more later on about how important it is to do this work as early as possible within the education system. I'm now at Teach First, where I've been for about 9 months or so. And Teach First was founded with really one major concern, which I know a lot of you will share as well, which is that success and outcomes in our education system are too rigidly tied to the family background of the young people within it. From the very start, when people arrive at school, throughout their journey through school, and particularly in their access to employment and to the destinations they can go to, in the way they can engage with further education, higher education and training as well. It is far too rigidly determined by background. We also have a very strong belief at Teach First that for all the structural engineering within the education system, that it's actually the decisions and relationships that people make inside it that can break that cycle. The power of a great teacher, the power of great careers advice, the power of engagement with employers that can change the decisions that people are making. And what we need to do more on, I think, is make sure that we're building those networks around the communities that need them the most. Now, my son has just finished his A-levels. I haven't seen him since. He's been in his bedroom ever since that thing. I assume he's sleeping on that basis. At every stage in this process, my ability to offer him advice and support, given the nature of my networks, I think has been incredibly helpful. He's thinking about getting a summer job. I've told him to think about getting a summer job, in fact, before he goes up to university. When he needed advice on what a CV should look like, I was able to offer some advice as someone who's read quite a few CVs over the time. I hope that was helpful to him. When he needed to think about what his A-level choice of subjects should be, what would help him get the job that he wanted, I was able to offer some advice on that. I was able to get him an internship at a number of different organizations so that he could get experience that would look good on his CV as well. And throughout that, I've been able to use my own social capital and networks to make sure that he gets what he needs. Not everybody in this country has those social networks as well. And as well as the distribution of wealth, I think the distribution of social capital across our country is something that we need to pay serious attention to, and is the key, I think, to unlocking fairer outcomes in employment and in further education and in the destinations that people go to. If we don't get that right, one of the results is manifest unfairness across our society, that the statistics that we continually read about the number of barristers, the number of judges, the number of journalists, the number of politicians that have gone to public school backgrounds as opposed to state school backgrounds will continue to be entrenched on that basis. And that's simply wrong in its own right. But I think it's also an increasing source of social tension as well. And I think one of the trends that we face at the moment is people being more receptive to, shall we say, the more extreme ends of the political spectrum, more willing to take radical choices that break the consensuses that we've had in previous years, with Brexit and Donald Trump, I think, being good examples of that. And part of the reason that's driving people to do that is that they feel they haven't got a sufficient stake in the system as it stands. Why not break it if you're not going to benefit from it? How much worse could it get? So I think we all have an interest in fairness in educational outcomes and employer engagement. But also another result of that is the maddening situation where employer after employer is talking to me about skills shortages, about vacancies that they have for good, interesting, valuable work that they simply can't get enough people with the right skills or preparedness for those jobs to take up. And where we have people languishing in low-quality employment or unemployment, while at the same time, not far away, there are good high-quality jobs available for them, that speaks of some serious friction, I think, within our economy and our society, which we need, I think, to address through employer engagement. This has not been helped, I think, by over the last 8 years, a fairly systematic dismantling of careers advice and guidance across the system as well. And interestingly, the one place where I don't see it being dismantled, and wherever I go into it, I see very nicely set out offices, resourced with people and materials, is in the independent sector as well. The careers advice and guidance in independent schools is top-notch. Ironically, this is probably the place where it's least needed, in the sense that those networks exist in a very strong form. I don't see it in the parts of the country where it's most needed as well. And I think more work to be done to resuscitate that and to make sure that we're able to learn from the mistakes of the past and build a high-quality careers and advice service is particularly important. One of the things I wanted to talk about this morning is a series of mismatches then, not just between the skills that employers demand and the skills that young people have. There are a number of mismatches in the system that I think are standing in the way of better employer engagement and fairer outcomes as well. There is, I think, a mismatch at the moment between what large numbers of young people aspire to and believe are the jobs of the future and what employers say they want and need as well. And this is particularly evident, I think, in STEM skills and STEM qualifications and education, where actually I think a lot of young people are afraid that choosing to specialize in the more technical area is closing off options to them. And again, this is an entirely frustrating set of conversations where you say, actually, if you had a maths A-level, you are opening options rather than closing them down. Even if you do decide you want to grow up to be an author or an artist or any of the other sides of it, you are far from closing these options down. And one of the big trends I see in the young people, which I don't think is a millennial thing, I think it's about all young people, is the idea of shutting off options is one of the most fearsome things that they can face. That if they're closing doors down before they've had a proper chance to taste all of the opportunities available to them, that is going to put people off. And I think we need to do a lot more work, I think, in showing the nature of the jobs that are available and the nature of the skills that underpin them too, so that we can encourage people to understand that some of these things are widening options rather than shrinking them. I also find to a degree that schools are not always well informed about local employment opportunities and the kind of trends that local employers are making and offering jobs and what jobs will be available in 3 to 5 years' time, that the level of engagement with local schools is often not as strong as it should be, and that there are good high-quality skilled work available that may require different routes of entry and different sets of learning. And to talk to a number of regional employers who worry about that people are looking in the wrong places for this work. So I think a lot of what those show is that there's also a mismatch between schools' knowledge of the labour market and what is happening in the labour market at the moment. And I don't think that should come as any surprise to people. Why should and how could schools become specialised in the trends that are available? What we need to be able to do is to get people who know that information access into schools and to spread that on. I also think there's a level of hype which is unhelpful when we talk a great deal about jobs that haven't been invented yet. This is a very common phrase within the education system, that X percentage of our young people will be doing jobs that haven't been invented yet. If I look 10 years ahead, I'm not sure that there will be a huge number of very different sorts of jobs within the system. And we can't really plan 50 years ahead. We have to plan for the next step and then build lifelong learning so that people can adapt to that. If you look 10 years back, we've largely got the same patterns of jobs. And if you look 10 years forwards, there will still be the same types of jobs within the system. There will be some changes at the margin. I wouldn't be encouraging a young person today to build a lifelong career around being a delivery driver, for example. That may well become automated and put out. But I think there are going to be doctors. I think there are going to be nurses. I think there are going to be teachers. I think there's going to be architects. I think there's going to be engineers as well. The crucial fact that I think we need to do is get away from talking about imaginary jobs that haven't been created and talk a lot more about how the skills within these jobs are fundamentally changing. So if you do aspire to work in agriculture and to be part of that, that will still be there. We're still going to eat things. I think that's not yet been automated through Silicon Valley. But the way we produce food will be fundamentally changing. And in that era, just like all of the other things, the use of digital skills and technology will be a fundamental part of it. So if you do want to go into farming, there are certain skills that you will need. And the same will be true of all the other professions as well. So it's not about getting people to think about imaginary jobs, but to imagine how the jobs that they aspire to will be changing as a result of the trends in our country at the moment. And I think that's an easier task, because I think there are certain trends that are affecting all jobs that we can start to invest in as well. So I think part of our job is to help redistribute the social capital, to help rebuild this network so we can get this information into the communities that need it most. When I look out there, I don't see any lack of concern or interest from employers. I think that there are long queues of employers who are ready to engage with education but are uncertain about how to do it and how it can be best helpful, uncertain how to navigate the different cultures and bureaucracies that pervade the education system as well. I think the Gatsby benchmarks that have been published are incredibly helpful to describe how we should be labeling best practice and what we should aspire to see. But what I wanted to do was pick out a number of bottlenecks, some in the school end and some in the employer end as well. In schools, one of the chief bottlenecks, which I think I've mentioned already, is that I think we tend to start careers advice and guidance too late. I think the process of employer engagement needs to begin at the primary school level, because I think too many choices are already being made later on within the system. And if we want children to choose the right GCSE options, for example, we need to be getting this information long before those choices are made. And increasingly, GCSE options are being chosen at 13 for three-year GCSE programs. If we want young people to know that particular jobs are not stereotyped to one gender or another, we also need to start that incredibly early. And I think the work that Nick and education employers have done on stereotypes in work at primary school is real food for thought on that matter. We need to start showing young people the sorts of jobs and the sorts of people who do these jobs so they can then start speculating about their aspirations and understanding how the work that they do in school connects to employment later on. And it's easy to draw a line between those two things, which I think then helps motivation and engagement with the more traditional academic tasks as well. So I think that our careers advice and our employer engagement has been too weighted towards the older end of the spectrum. Another bottleneck at the school level, or another challenge that we need to overface, is that it is tempting to denigrate the academic side of education when we talk about vocational routes and employment. We hear a lot, particularly from employers, that the skills that they're looking for are not the subject-based academic skills, that they're looking for problem solving, creativity, innovation, and teamwork. And it's certainly true that they are, and I do as an employer, and I think those are incredibly important. But I also believe that many of these are built on strong academic foundations as well, and that there are certain transferable skills like literacy and numeracy that will not go out of fashion in the digital age, that there are certain underpinnings that we should be concentrating on, and that problem solving itself does actually fundamentally rely on a certain degree of knowledge about a specific domain as well. And that if we want people to be creative problem solvers in engineering, there is a level of science, physics, and mathematical background that they will need to be able to go on and do that. And that is true in other areas as well. We need to get both out of our education system. We don't need to have a sterile debate between the vocational and the interpersonal skills and the academic underpinnings as well. I also worry that the drive to be relevant and to stay up to date within the education system is creating a more frenetic and faster pace within our schools and colleges as well. As we try to prepare people for the very latest trend in skills, particularly the technical and digital skills, we're constantly racing ahead, looking at the curriculum, looking at changing and adapting what we do to fit this. But the world outside schools is only going to get faster and faster. So if we follow that route, to keeping up, we're going to have to get faster and faster inside schools as well. And as soon as we design one curriculum, we're going to rip it up and start on designing another one. And to be honest, if we're training young people in a particular software package, the chances are that that will be out of date before they have left school itself. So we can either race faster and faster to keep up with the rapid pace of change in the world, or we can take another approach, and that's to step back and say, what are the enduring skills and truths within our education system? What is not going out of fashion? And it's very helpful to look at the things that have endured for decades or centuries even, to predict what will be here in a decade or a century's time as well. So maybe training in that latest software package is not the right thing to do. But maybe a great novel, maybe English literature, maybe the study of history will contain some enduring truths that will be useful when young people go into management positions or where they have to tackle many of the interpersonal problems that are common within the workplace as well. And I think that it is wrong for the education system to constantly accelerate its pace to try and match the outside world. What we need to do is seek more of the enduring truths that will work across sectors and across generations and across decades as well. And there are some out there. On that basis, I would also say that it seems to me that the extracurricular activities within schools are some of the most powerful ways that we can drive the project-based skills, the team leadership skills, the discovery and creativity that is so important within the education system as well. And it seems to me that one of the challenges that we've faced is that the way we measure the performance of schools and colleges these days on strict academic credentials is crowding out the time and space to build on these sorts of activities as well. It's not necessarily productive to re-engineer the delivery of teaching to deliver, say, some of these team leadership skills, but there are many opportunities outside that curriculum as well if we can build it in. And it's particularly frustrating because in truth, as I said earlier, there is no contradiction between academic excellence and strong extracurricular offer and activity within schools. The best schools and colleges and places of learning do both at the same time. Over the long term, both of them work together to feed off each other. The trouble is there is a contradiction often in the short term when you're trying to turn around the performance of a school or institution and the sole measurements are on the academic results coming out. And you're made frustrating choices as to whether to put time into further coaching for exams or producing further extracurricular activity as well. And I think one of the things that we need to do to get that right is to develop a more long-term series of measures across our education system so that the leaders of these institutions are making choices and designing for 5 years ahead rather than next year's or this year's exam results, which I think drive all of the wrong behaviours that we see at the moment. In terms of bottlenecks or challenges at the employer end of the spectrum to meet these, the first one that seems most evident to me is how we could encourage more employers to get outside of London when it comes to offering these opportunities to young people as well. In many ways, schools in London are embarrassed by the riches of employer engagement opportunities. They're turning away volunteers from their doors in some instances. And if you're lucky enough to be running a school in Tower Hamlets or something like that, you only have to look up to see the employment opportunities that might be available. And I think that level of sort of visible aspiration and opportunity has been a key part of the success of the London Challenge as well. What we need to make sure is that these internships, these careers advice and guidance opportunities and other events is equally distributed across the country as well and are reaching some of the more inaccessible parts of the country, particularly the coastal and rural communities too. And that will require, I think, a big ask of employers to step outside from their headquarters. But there are many who are trying to build regional centres, and I think that's a strong opportunity. And the more we can encourage that, the fairer the system will be. I think we need to move away from one-off engagement opportunities and see employers build long-term relationships with the institutions that they serve and to provide a mix of them visiting schools, but also bringing young people out of schools and colleges and other institutions to experience the workplace too. And good quality internships, summer projects and other opportunities I think are a key part of building that awareness of what the world of work is really like. And we need to make sure again that they're distributed. And so as the Gatsby benchmarks tell us, a good career strategy is an integrated strategy which has a number of different strands to it. And I think that just a one-off visit to talk to a class about the career path is not going to produce the kind of changes that we want. But I think increasingly employers are interested in building those sorts of relationships because they can see it as part of their brand, see it as part of their corporate social responsibility, see it as being part of the local community as well. But there are many differences in culture and systems and processes between education and the employment world that often mean that those connections are not made and that relationships are broken there. So I think if we can tackle some of those challenges, I think that we can more fairly distribute the social capital that will give young people better access to employment opportunities. I am optimistic that we can do this. I know that careers advice and guidance has been a sort of perennial problem within policy making, has gone from one trend to another over time. But I do see a number of trends that give me optimism. I see goodwill on both sides. I see schools and colleges and other institutions interested in the destinations that their young people are going to, interested in how well they're preparing them for life, not just for a narrow curriculum. So there is outreach on that end. And I see employers, again, constantly talking at all of the discussions and roundtables I'm going to about how they can build better connections, how they can give young people a better idea of what the opportunities are. So I think that there is goodwill that is waiting to be used if we can end those mismatches. I see potentially a better balancing of the vocational and higher education routes that might come, but then we've seen this before, so I will I'll suspend my disbelief for a while and see if we can get that matched up better, such that apprenticeships, further education, universities and employment-based training are seen as equal routes coming outside of school. But I do see a gradual move away from higher education as being the defining feature of success in school outcomes as well, and I think that gives positivity. But what I think we need to do is to give education institutions the space in terms of how we manage their performance to care about the long term and to care about the roundedness of the young people that they're producing and helping into the world as well. If we can do that, then the goodwill can be utilised. So thank you very much for your time. I'll take a few questions now. Thank you.